Good afternoon, all. I hope I'm audible. So, welcome to the main day of BPM 2023. Thank you all for making it a huge success. So, today, uh, the next tech session that we have is on app modernization, devising security agenda, uh, for which we'll be joined by Colonel Dr. Dinesh Kumar. He is an Indian Army veteran and an subject matter expert on cybersecurity and emerging technologies. Sorry, thank you. We are also joined by Rima Bose, VP JV Morgan and Chase, Deepti Chauhan, VP Global InfoSec Cybersecurity Assurance Genpact, Balaji Raghunathan, VP ITC Infotech, and Nidhi Agarwal, Director of Engineering Cybersecurity Target. Now I will hand over the mic to Colonel Dr. Dinesh to take over the discussions ahead. Thank you, everyone.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm audible. Thank you. Before I start the session, I want to just give a pointer to two news headlines which I was reading yesterday. One was that the three tech giants who have cleansed the deal amounting to 20 billion US dollars, deals from UK, US, and elsewhere around the globe. And out of this, there are two key areas which are part of this deal. One is modernization, and second is cybersecurity, in addition to others. So that's underlying the importance of this session which we are doing now. The second news is that over last 10 years, the tech sector has added 10 lakh women folks to the tech sector. I think it calls for an applause. And DSCI has taken care that this is well reflected here in my panel. We have 3 women panelists here. And I sympathize with Balaji, who is in minority here. Okay. Right. Considering the time of the day, and I can see some people sitting on the edge of their seats, probably there to catch their flights or something. Let's dive deep into the subject and kickstart the discussion right away. Before I start talking to my panelists, who are expert from all the facets of modernization, starting from application development to management to bringing in security into it, standards, compliance, legal instruments which they have to, adhere to, comply to, and of course, last but not the least, things like risk assessment and risk management. And they are hugely experienced. Balaji's got 25-year plus experience. I won't add number of years to the experience of my women co-panelists, but that will give away their age. But they are hugely experienced, ladies and gentlemen. They are experts. I am the only square peg in the round hole. They do cybersecurity, but last for 10 years or so, I don't do cybersecurity, I teach. So that's the difference between them and me. In fact, a couple of terminologies I have just learned here only in last 2 days, which they would be talking about. So let me apologize up front. So talking about app modernization, to my understanding, when we talk of app modernization, it would mean that legacy applications which are running on-premise need to be re-architectured, maybe from a monolithic architecture to microservices-based architecture, and each of these microservices need to be accessed through APIs. And when we talk about security, the APIs have got their attendant security issues which are there. Now you come to the cloudification to have the efficiency and the reach of the applications. These applications have to be re-platformed to the clouds. And you know, in the Indian scenario, there are just 2, 3 cloud services which are there. So when you do a cloudification on application, it comes with this attendant security issues which are there. So my co-panelist will be addressing all these issues. I would first go to Nidhi, who has spent quite a bit of time in IT industry looking after the software development to software management, writing algorithms, coding, and looking after information security governance. The industry has come a long way as far as the application development is concerned. As an old hag, would remember we started from waterfall, then we came to agile technologies for development, then we started talking about SDLC, came to DevOps, then DevSecOps, and what have you. And today we are even saying that, okay, let the developer own the security of the applications also. I wonder what is this paradigm, but I'm sure people must be able to do that. I want to ask you, Nidhi, along all this, how do you take the organization along? Because this is not a technology issue. It's an issue which is concerned with the culture. It's an issue which is concerned with changing the mindsets in an organization, which is quite a difficult task for people who handle the security at the level at which she is handling. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Dinesh. Good afternoon, everybody. Before I get into the answer of the question, you are very kind and modest to introduce us like this, whereas you are doing much better job than probably all of us. We are one, and you, by teaching, are going to create many, many more, much better than what we are today. So thank you so much. How do we take the organization along? Yes, when it comes to app modernization, sir, as you rightly called out, it's not only at the engineers. No, you get up today and say, tomorrow we are going to use this, we have to change this, let's get going. No, it has to be the whole thing, like from top to bottom, everybody first needs to be aligned with it. So then organization level, we have to make a conscious and cautious decision of whether we want to do this or not, first thing. Second thing, the effort and the intent that we want to put in, this should be very, very clear. And it's extremely non-negotiable entity for any initiative to be successful. Now getting to what do we do? I come from retail, and I was very fortunate to join this company at the time when it had just embarked on its modernization journey. There are a lot of facets to it, but I'll just, in the interest of time, I'll just point out few of them that stood out for me as a developer or an engineer at that point in time. One is enabling the organization for learning. So you're modernizing it, you know that you're going to do something that you didn't know already. So learning is the first step. And you have to provide that environment. I'll tell you what we did. We did boot camps. We all are familiar with the word boot camp, right? But it generates a scare in us. It was not scary. What we did something called dojo. It is like a conducive environment provided by a program in which the entire team would go for a couple of weeks there with a small unit of their business problem that they want to solve with the new tech stack that they've come up with as part of modernization exercise. They'll have specialized experts there working with them, guiding them through agile, engineering, DevOps, secure coding, and whatnot. They'll be in that environment for a couple of weeks depending on the scrum or the sprints, whatever they plan to. And when they come out, they have deployed their one full unit to prod. And second, now they are very well equipped to at least understand what will it take for them to now go and build bigger feature outside. They have a checklist, they have a guidelines, and they also have a set of people whom they can reach out to. They know the material. So that's the extremely important point to get started with. Second is abstraction.
Okay.
Now, when we build a product or a COE, we take a lot of open source code, we buy a lot of licensed products, and we build a lot as well. But when we talk about modernization, I think that's a crucial point when we need to step back and see, do we really need all this? We needed that then. I'm not contesting at all. But should we trim it down a little bit? Should we buy? Should we build? And I'm not proposing one versus another. I'm a big fan of both of them, depending on where I need what. But the thing is, rationalize it. I come from retail, so everybody need antivirus. So would I go about building an antivirus for my company? Of course not. There are very mature products sitting outside that can do a much better job than what my product would do. It take years to do. But I definitely need a risk engine which is very specific to my domain.
Okay.
So I'll go about and build it from scratch so that I can address my domain's risks. Second, for engineers, what's extremely important, we are talking about, you said, sir, we came all the way from waterfall model, and today we talk about full stack developers, no? Poor engineer, he has to do everything all by himself now. But we can't expect them to be experts in everything. And that's where, when it comes to tools and products, it should be with the experts. You know, I'm a security expert, so I should know antivirus, I should know firewall. But to a developer, it should be tool agnostic. It should be a capability. No, I'm done with my coding, I have to run a SAST. One click, my SAST is done. I don't know what tool you're using behind the scenes. That's your security team's job to do it. Tomorrow they can upgrade it, they can make it better, they can change it, they can do anything. My work will go unhampered at all. I can move my code to prod.
Right.
So for the engineers, talk to us in terms of capabilities, not tools, because probably we won't understand.
Right.
We are so much engrossed with Kotlin, Java, React.js and all. Now, if you pile up security on top of them, then definitely they will think that we are adding friction, which we are not.
Yeah,
I'm a
thank you.
strong proponent of that.
Thanks, Neha, thanks.
And the
Yeah.
third is governance. Now, you build all the process, you enable everybody, educate everybody, bring in awareness. But if you don't sustain it by an appropriate form of governance, you don't know when you'll lose track. So you need to ensure of continuous evaluation to ensure you are continuing to do what you intended to do in the beginning.
Right. Thank you. That's a good, that all the good points which you have alluded to. Balaji, will come to you. You've been handling the digital transformation, re-architecturing of applications, privacy, security issues. And Balaji, ladies and gentlemen, has got 2 patents from the US Office of Patents. Give him applaud for this. He is grossly he's involved with the security and privacy issues too. So I would like to ask you, Balaji, when we're talking of app modernization, do we have certain frameworks for going about it, or does everyone has a different approach?
Yeah. Hello.
Yeah, you're audible, I guess.
Yeah. So when it comes to app modernization, essentially, you have 2 tracks, right? One is you're either just going to cloud, or the other one is, you can go to cloud and make your monolith into microservice. So now, one thing what cloud has achieved is it has sort of given frameworks in its own, basically it's a standard thing. If you look at Azure, you have something called the well-architected framework. Same thing you have even in AWS, and Google has the equivalent. So I think you can have comparable frameworks across at least the larger ones, right? So I think the first part is like, use the cloud-native frameworks. That's the first part from a modernization perspective. Now, second is about, I think you have the NIST frameworks. But then when you actually develop, you go by 2 main things. One is secure by design. Second is privacy by design. So what actually secure by design actually advocates is that, the first part is like the principle of least privilege, right? Many applications, especially when a developer builds, right, they will want admin access, right? That's basically what is, not, it is something which should not be done, right? So that's the principle of least privilege. So basically, whatever least privilege the application needs, it needs to operate on that. Then the other thing, what most of you, if you have been in part of development, is you would have seen is that your error messages, right? It should be graceful and it should fail safe. So when I say fail safe, let us take an example of, say, a banking app or a banking website, right? So you type a wrong password, right? You should not be saying that your password is wrong, which means that you know that your username is right, but your password is wrong. Similarly, you should not do the reverse, right? I think that's the most common developer error you will see. So essentially, fail safe. How do you fail securely, right? I think that's the other part from a secure by design concept. Now, I mean, I don't want to go through all the other secure by design principles, but then you also have this privacy by design principles. So when it comes to privacy design principles, I think the idea, especially when it is a mobile app and when it is a startup, is to just hoard data, right, without user consent. I think put that user in mind, put the user privacy in mind. That is basically the key principle of privacy by design. Then of course there is data at rest and data in motion, what you need to do. So yeah, I think so when you look at frameworks, especially from a modernization perspective, you have something called the 12-factor app. The 12-factor app is essentially, how do you ensure that an application is, all the ability, right, scalability, reliability. So essentially all those comes into picture. But the idea is how do you develop faster and how do you develop securely. So I think that is one essential framework. And then you go to the privacy by design, security by design. And then of course you go to the well-architected framework from a cloud perspective. And that well-architected framework that has different pillars. You have operational excellence pillars, you have cost efficiency pillars, then you have security as a pillar. And I think that security is like very, very important when it comes to app modernization. So I think these are the broad frameworks from an app modernization perspective.
Thank you. Okay. Coming to Rema, you worked with people like Oracle and IBM, and now at the JP Morgan and Chase, you're handling cybersecurity technology controls, which make all these security things realize, and standards and compliances which you handle. You also handling the banking operations, banking applications delivery. Yeah. What are the three biggest challenges which you look as far as the security is concerned? And let me also add here that what are these standards which facilitate you to build the security in the applications which you are handling now?
Sure, I'll start.
I don't expect you to be specific to your company as such, but whatever the general information you can say.
Yeah, just a disclaimer, opinions are all personal, not from JP Morgan. So the three biggest challenges for app modernization, specifically if you're talking about moving to cloud, the first would be compliance with regulatory standards. So we are like a global banking operation. Like most of our companies are not just based in one country, they are based globally. So you have the regulatory standards of different countries to adhere to. Different regulatory bodies are there, and then you have, apart from your standard frameworks and which is kind of like very well known nowadays, like ISO and NIST. You also have frameworks like RBI for payments tech. You have OCC in US. You have different in China, in Saudi, in Malaysia, Indonesia. Every country has their own cloud standards, so to say, and what is allowed on cloud, what is not allowed, what has to be housed in country. That sort of what is the very definition of a privacy changes country by country. The second challenge is again related to data privacy, data classification. We just have the DPDP Act here. Previously, we used to have the we have the GDPR. So the classification of data is very important when you're doing an application modernization, because is it a SPI, is it a personally identifiable information, PII, is it a highly confidential information, like payments data is highly confidential, or so different categories of data have different policies and different securities. So that is another big challenge, because even before doing an app modernization, you have to look at the data and you have to categorize it, classify it, clean it, have your data lineage ready, so that when you are presenting to a regulator or when you are seeking regulatory approval to go to cloud, these sort of data modeling, data use cases are essential.
Permit me to just interrupt you here. So I'll forget that point otherwise. I don't have that kind of instant memory. Give it to my gray hair. In one of the session on privacy, the speaker Nishant Bazaria was telling us, in UK, as per the GDPR, one privacy violation costs you 2875 US dollars. That is the kind of penalty they're imposing. So in that kind of a scenario, the privacy issues, I think, must be very, very difficult to handle, and building them in.
Yeah, so like Balaji mentioned, you build security into the architecture even before you are putting it on cloud. Build this privacy by design and security by design in the architecture. So those were like the top two challenges, three challenges I would say. There is of course the cost, and there is of course other non-secure kind of like functional challenges. Um, you mentioned about standards and how they help in overcoming these challenges and moving to app modernization, I'd say, or not just say cloud. Standards provide consistency, right? So with standards, we know what we are getting. Like if a third party audits the firm, they audit it against a specific standards, and they kind of like, it's a certification that someone creditable has reviewed your standards and reviewed the kind of security that is there. All standards like ISO 27001, NIST, they provide frameworks which can be used while designing the architecture itself.
Right, right. Thank you.
I mean, you have, I'd say like NIST has 1189 or some 1200 different controls across 20 different groups. CSA has, I think, some 197 something controls. ISO has 114 controls, and you can't like go one by one towards the controls. You have to like build them during the architecture phase, and the developers have to do that. It's not like you build something on cloud and then you go and add controls. It's not going to happen. You can't add this 1200 controls later on. So there are certain tools, like we can have GCR or something, like where all the controls are kind of like, we call them architectural patterns.
Okay.
We kind of base these controls, like you have stability and resiliency controls, which can be implemented in cloud by VPCs or by regions. So you have a cross region and you have replication. So you build that into an architectural pattern and use that pattern across
Thank you.
your architecture.
Thank you. I understand. There's a maze of, compliances, controls, and standards which a developer and the modernization person have to navigate through. Coming to you, Deepthi, you have, once again, I'll cut out the number. You have huge experience handling the risk assessment and risk management framework across multiple sectors. If I may ask you, how do you implement a strong identity program when you are talking of moving an application to a cloud platform? I think you can't really resort to lift and shift. There are a lot of things in between which need to be done. So I would request if you can throw some light on this as to how do you go about doing that.
Thank you, Colonel Dinesh. Hi, everyone.
I'm sorry because you're sitting at such a distance, so your turn came after a long time, 10 minutes. Okay.
I'm not complaining, right? I think, I hope the audience is awake. I mean, I almost slept off at some point, but
Please take the mic closer to your.
sure.
Yeah.
So, all right, I'll come straight to the point here. If I were to ask some of you, I mean, if you had to implement an identity solution in your organization, what's the first step you would take? Right? Would you build a business case, what your use case is, or would you think that implementing a tool is the first thing I'll do? Right? Obviously, it's the use case first. Tool is a subset of that, it comes much later. So when I am moving an application from, say, on-prem, a legacy application to the cloud, the couple of things you should look at is, A, why are you moving it? What is the objective it is serving? Is it really required? Am I going to use it very often? Is scalability needed for it? If yes, how many people are going to access it? What is the complexity of access management that I need for this application? Also, if I'm moving it to cloud, it will not work the same way it did earlier. If it is an application that has been in my environment organization for many years, and if I'm going to make changes to it and I'm moving it to the cloud after that, will my users actually accept that change? Because the first thing you will hear is, well, I can't log in, my password has expired, this is too complex, why can't we go back to the way we were? You will hear all this dissent. So how are you managing that change journey as well is extremely important. And I think, like Nidhi mentioned earlier on, right, we undermine the importance of people acceptance and change management whenever we implement something. It's extremely important. It makes or breaks any deployment that you're going to do, and whether you're going to get a return on it later on. So understand your landscape, understand why you need it, then move it. See if what you're moving and the new change that you're making to the application, will it accept modern authentication methods or not, like OAuth or any of the others. If it doesn't, then maybe moving it is not the right thing. Maybe you need to build a new one, or maybe look at connectors that can help you bridge that gap. So think of those things. I'll give you a classic example. So we had this old HR application that, post-COVID had to move to the cloud because there was no other way to access it. Now the problem with that is there's a session authentication that takes place. Even after I log out, the session remains active for 2 hours. That is built into the code by design. How do you solve for that? Unless I move it out and bring in a new application because it's outdated now. So A, are you moving legacy applications? Are they end of life? Are they end of service? So again, coming back to the earlier point, can it adapt to modern authentication methods is extremely important. So look for that. Then comes the regular stuff, which all of you I'm sure already know, and I'm probably repeating it again, which is your role-based access controls, multi-factor authentication. All of that is extremely important, so go about that as well. And then think about how are you going to manage this access at all times? How are you going to manage the authorization to the data in those applications? So which means, do you want to do an identity fabric? Do you want to do zero trust network? Do you want to do a combination of that? Is your password complexity working for you? Or do you want to go the passwordless route, which is all the rage now? If you read the latest articles on this, passwordless is poised to be the next big thing. So is that something that's going to apply for you, yes or no? So think about these factors, loop in that role-based access, implement them as security baseline controls as part of the coding, as part of the policy, and then have a check and balance in the sense of, because you will have shadow IT,
Okay.
right? So to prevent that, you need to have certain bottleneck controls. And yes, InfoSec is often viewed as a bottleneck or just as an approving mechanism. But to prevent that shadow IT from becoming an amoeba that you cannot manage any longer, you need to have that one approval check somewhere that if a deployment is going on cloud with XYZ, without this one approval, it doesn't move, period. At the right layers. I'm not saying at the end of it because then everything will pile up, right? So have those controls in place, and that works extremely well. So that, I think, in a nutshell, is how you go about the whole thing.
And what is this, before you put the mic down, let me give another question here itself. What is this identity fabric and zero trust stuff?
Absolutely. So, see, identity fabric is something that all IT teams will love. because it's one fabric through which you can manage all your access management requirements, identity requirements across any platform, any tool. So it can be an on-prem, it can be cloud, it could be multi-cloud, it could be hybrid. But with a fabric, it sits on the application layer. It acts as an interface between your firewall and your server, right? So what it does is it's that one single platform with which you can manage, automate all onboardings and offboardings and, giving the access permissions and so on and so forth. So from a management standpoint, it's extremely easy. But then from a security standpoint, it's also your single point of failure. If that one fabric is...
I mean, you keep shifting security left, 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 and the whole security is now onto my left. I'm the only guy who is expecting security to be there, is on the extreme right, and the security has shifted left. So just tell us, how do you build an application secure by design as far as the app modernization is concerned? And also at the same time, can you recommend some tools which can make the life of people a little easy?
Sure, thank you, sir. You are creating the foundation. We are just taking it toward in one direction, that's all. Again, secure by design looks like a developer's job. And I'll go back to my first thing, it's not. Again, it's a whole organization that needs to be part of it, yes, at different levels with different skill sets, but they definitely play a role to it. We need our engineers to be security aware, but we probably don't need everybody to be a specialist. Unless, of course, you're building some product that is going to be used in some company for running a DAST. Then you need security specialists. But otherwise, you need them to be aware. I will not go into the theoretical aspect of it, which pretty much all of us in this room are very much aware of it. I'll talk about what we have implemented and what I've seen my organization do. And I'll limit my question to people, process, and technology. So first step is, how do you use people and process to enable this at multiple levels in your organization, from your engineering to your leadership? What we have is, we have two separate groups. One, we have ninjas. Okay. They don't fight. They are security ninjas. They are the security champions within engineering teams. So these are the people who understand engineering very well, but they also understand security equally well. So when a requirement comes to your team that we have to build this feature, they bring in that security angle and say, right from the beginning when you're designing or architecting it, you have to follow the OWASP practice. You have to follow secure coding guidelines. You have to make sure your password is in a vault. It's not in a plain text. They will make sure nothing is overlooked, and other engineers will follow them. So they are the ones who are bridging the gap between engineering and secure coding practices both. Second layer is BISOs, BISO analysts, like business information security officers. So we have a team of those people. Those are security specialists who are sitting between the engineering teams and the business. They understand business very well. They also understand engineering to an extent that they can convey the messaging across both of them, like serving as a mediator. Now, sometimes business comes and says, I want to implement this. But technically, in security perspective, we know it should not be done because it's going to pose a lot of threat. Who will take that message back to the leadership and convince it looks good to your business, but you might end up getting exploited? And the other way around as well. He may come and say, you have to build this feature, and the engineers are like, oh, no, if you build this feature, there will be this problem happening. Why don't you just throw an OTP and be done with it? Step up, done, problem solved. I cannot do it. Bad user experience. My customers will move away to a different platform which provides ACE. Today, we all as customers, as security professionals, we look for security. But as customers, we all will agree to it. We'll look for easy experience, but secure as well. So they build the gap between the two, and hence, now these two different group of people will bring the leadership, the engineers, the analysts, the process, the security experts, everybody together to build something from scratch and take it to deployment. That's the first part of it. Second part is process and technology. I talked about capabilities earlier. As a developer, I should not know whether you're using a burp tool or this tool or that tool. For me, they are capabilities. I know once I build my code, I have to run for a security software composition analysis has to run, or a SAST has to run. This should be orchestrated as part of my working pipeline for deployment. I need not do everything explicitly. But there should be some on-demand capabilities also made available. So when all of this is done at different layers, where security specialists are doing their job to provide you these tools, but in my environment as an engineer, I'm tool agnostic. I just know the capability and I run with it and I do my job well. When all these things come together, that is when secure by design automatically happens.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's quite a practical take which you have given. Uh, Balaji is feeling left out because the question is bouncing from. Yeah, Balaji, let me keep you engaged. In the backdrop of DPDP 2023, uh, how do you look at the building of security and privacy into this modernization and when you are doing the cloudification?
Yeah, I think.
And at the same time, I mean, if you can hear itself, you can also how you involve people into it when you are doing this.
So I think the first part is like whenever there's any modernization initiative, where you can have a significant privacy leak is basically the testing area, right? So how do you get data for testing, right? So I think that's the key thing you need to look at when you look at it from a privacy perspective. So for that, generally what we have seen is that most organizations are not ready, right? So essentially, like when you want to offshore it or send it to another country or even outsource it to somebody or even have the test teams use it, right? So you need to know, what data is shareable, what data is not shareable, what data is private. I mean, I think Rima mentioned about PHI, PAI, right? So I think we need to know what is the data, what part of data is secure, I mean, what data is sensitive, what part of data is, regulatorily needed to be compliant, right? So all those are pretty much, a legal domain which somebody from the software side would not want to do. So ideally, the best way to prepare for app modernization is to at least have the data classification done. So you need to know what data is shareable across the public. So essentially, what is public, then what is internal, what is secret, and then what is maybe highly secret, right? And then you need to know how do you protect your sensitive data. So internal, for example, should not go out of the firewall. But if it is a sensitive data, then should it be encrypted? What should we do as part of data masking? Should we do data masking? Should we do data tokenization? So I think that's where the protection and the privacy aspects comes into picture. And then essentially what you do, I mean, when we look at it from an app modernization perspective, typically how do you take data from production to the test environment? So now whether you need to take all the data out or no, so essentially you do something called data subsetting, right, which preserves that relational integrity. Once you do that subsetting, you actually then figure out whether you do data masking at runtime. How do you do data masking at runtime? How do you do when it is at rest, right? So I think that is basically what is the key thing when it comes to application modernization, the availability of test data, secure private test data, right? So that is one thing. Now the next area where things are going towards from a modernization perspective is like you're going to see more of AI and ML come in. And here, especially using generative AI, you're looking at an area called synthetic data generation. So you actually leverage generative AI to generate data to train your models, right? And it should be, production-like, so that you can train your models. So that's the other area where you need to preserve your privacy. So I think, yeah, I mean, I think essentially the test area, the test data management, how do you manage privacy along that, that comes into picture in a big way. And then of course, like from an architecture perspective, I think somebody talked about the OASP. So those OASP principles, how do you apply, especially when it is an API, right? So essentially, how do you apply that 10 principles from an OASP perspective?
OASP
all those also comes into picture.
Thank you.
I think you asked one question about some governance.
Yeah, I think we've got just 3 minutes left. I wanted Rima to just add, purely from the Indian context, do you, and DPDP 23 is continuing with this, Do you look at some specific advantages and disadvantages to the Indian users as such, Indian context?
For DPDP, definitely, I mean,
But
DPDP was,
vis-a-vis rest other countries where you are operating.
um, so DPDP was long due, I think, a personal opinion again.
Okay.
So, and the details are yet to be published. Like, we have to have a list of countries to which the data cannot be shared. So, those technical details will be there in the DSCI website.
Okay.
So, but yeah, it's advantageous to users. So DPDP basically talks about the personal data, it talks about data fiduciaries, and it talks about the data transfer. So yesterday I learned a new term, TIA. So till now we had the DPIA, like data privacy impact assessment. Yes. Now we have transfer impact assessment. Yes. So DPDP will be advantageous, like while we are like a global economy and we are like, I mean, doing transactions all across the world, some data needs to be segregated. So there is these things about logical segregation and physical segregation of data, like housing the data completely in country or just controlling the access to the data, logically segregating it, so to speak. So the way I look at it is that, again, this has to be built into the architecture, into the design principles, DPDP, like we do for GDPR. I mean, that's the most
Okay.
well-known, so that's why I'm taking GDPR. But yeah, so DPDP is.
Thank you. I think we are running out of time. Otherwise, I would have invited some questions from the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, I got a minute and a half left, and I come from a community, from the government and that to defense, which is labeled as security paranoid. Rightly so. When it comes to looking at the applications whose compromise will undermine the national security, we need to be security paranoid. And there is another level of security which is required for the security paranoid people. If I have the scientist, Dr. Bhupendra Singh around here, who is telling me it's actually known as paranoid security level, when we are talking of cryptographic controls and stuff like that. I would only, while winding up this discussion, I would only request the audience, my co-panelists are experts in their own areas, and they have really thrown the pearls of wisdom. And we, as a nation, will do well if we adhere to that. If not, winding before, I would like to wind up with what Mirza Ghalib said about 150 years ago. If people don't adhere to it, because every day you are listening, the same SQL injection attacks were taking place 10 years ago, and today if you pick up a news item, you will find SQL attack or SQL attacks are taking place, SQL injection attack taking place today also. So I would only say, यारब ना वो समझे हैं ना समझेंगे मेरी बात, यारब ना वो समझे हैं ना समझेंगे मेरी बात, दे और दिल उनको ना दे मुझको जुबां और. We can't say more than what we have said. I think आपको दूसरे दिल की ज़रूरत है. Means you have to change your mindset if we need to be secure. Thank you very much. I think I will request for applause for my panel. They have done a wonderful job. Thank you very much. By the way, Nidhi comes from Lucknow, so she must be delighted to hear this here.